Critique of Metaphysical Illusion. In the first two critiques, we have observed the operational scheme of enlightenment, self-limitation of reason, accompanied by renewed glances beyond the border, whereby one takes the liberty of small trips across the border, with private provisos such as discretion. In the critique of metaphysics, things proceed in basically the same way. It can do nothing more than remind human reason of its own limitations. It pursues the thought that reason is indeed capable of posing metaphysical questions, but is incapable of settling them conclusively through its own resources. It is the great achievement of Kantian enlightenment to have shown that reason functions reliably only under the conditions of experiential knowledge. With anything that goes beyond experience, it necessarily overreaches its basic capacities. It is a part of its essential character to want to do more than it can. Once the logical critique has taken place, therefore, fruitful propositions concerning objects beyond the empirical are no longer possible. Of course, metaphysical ideas like God, soul, and universe inevitably intrude into thought, but they cannot be treated in any conclusive manner through the means given to thought. There would be some hope if such ideas were empirical, but since they are not, there is no hope that reason will ever come to terms with these topics. The rational apparatus is, of course, equipped for an incursion into these problems, but not to return from such excursions into the beyond with any clear, unequivocal answers. Reason sits, so to speak, behind a grating through which it believes it gains metaphysical insights. But what at first seems to be knowledge, erkenntnis, proves to be self-deception under the light of critique. To a certain extent, reason has to be taken in by the illusion that it itself has created in the form of metaphysical ideas. By ultimately coming to recognize its own limits and its own futile play with the expansion of those limits, it unmasks its own efforts as futile. This is the modern form of saying, "I know that I know nothing." This knowledge entails, in a positive sense, only the knowledge of the limits of knowledge. Whoever then continues with metaphysical speculation is exposed as a border violator, as a starving wretch longing for the unattainable. All metaphysical alternatives are of equal value and undecidable. Determinism versus indeterminism, finiteness versus infinitude, the existence of God versus the non-existence of God, idealism versus materialism, and so forth. In all such questions there are at least two logically necessary possibilities, which are equally well or equally poorly founded. One need not, should not, must not make a decision as soon as one has recognized both alternatives as reflections of the structure of reason. For any decision implies a metaphysical, dogmatic regression. Of course, we must make a distinction here. Metaphysical thinking bequeaths an invaluable inheritance to enlightenment, namely the remembrance of the connection between reflection and emancipation, a connection that remains valid even when the grand systems have collapsed. For that reason, enlightenment was always at the same time logic, and more than logic, reflective logic. Self-enlightenment is possible only for those who know what world whole they are a part of. For this reason, social and natural philosophies today have taken over the legacy of metaphysics, to be sure with the required intellectual discretion. This is also the reason why enlightenment cannot be identical with a theory of faulty thinking that has a long tradition from Aristotle up to Anglo-Saxon language philosophy. Enlightenment never has been concerned only with the unmasking of projections, logical leaps, errors in inference, fallacies, the elision of logical categories, false premises and interpretations, etc., etc., but above all with the self-experience of the human being and the labour it costs to critically dissolve naive world and self-images. The authentic tradition of enlightenment thus always felt alienated by the attempts of modern logical positivistic cynicism to confine thinking completely to the tub of pure analysis. But it is worthwhile shedding light on the fronts. The logical positivists, who smile derisively at the great themes of the philosophical tradition by referring to them as illusory problems, radicalize one of the tendencies characteristic of enlightenment. The turn away from the great problems is cynically inspired. Is not Wittgenstein really the Diogenes of modern logic, and Carnap the desert hermit of empiricism? It is as if they, with their strict intellectual asceticism, wanted to force the carelessly garrulous world to repent, this world to which logic and empiricism do not mean ultimate revelations, and that, unaffected in its hunger for useful fictions, continues to behave as if the sun does, in fact, revolve around the earth, and as if the mirages of imprecise thinking are, in fact, good enough for our practical life.